Salam sejahtera, anda bersama saya Reza Zulkafli dan ini Niaga AWANI. Sepanjang minggu ini kami bawakan laporan berhubung industri minyak dan gas global yang terkesan susulan pandemik COVID-19. Ini terutama akibat permintaan dan harga minyak dan gas merosot di seluruh dunia. Dan petang ini syarikat minyak dan gas negara Petronas akan umum keputusan kewangan separuh pertama 2020. Untuk melihat jangkaan pengumuman ini, bersama kita di talian adalah Jameel Ahmad, Pengarah Strategi Pelaburan Naga AG. Naga adalah syarikat pelaburan dan juga fintech tersenarai di Jerman. Jameel, so Petronas is scheduled to announce its first half financial year 2020 results later today. We've seen how other global oil and gas companies have fared since the start of COVID-19. What can we expect from Petronas later this afternoon?
So Petronas is, of course, seen as a major Tier 1 release for Malaysia, specifically when it comes to corporations within Malaysia. And the view is that expectations are low, and that's for understandable reasons because of the shock of the pandemic. And multiple companies right now are coming from what we call a very low base, which is where expectations are extremely weak. So we will see a disappointing result. This is what's been pretty consistent with all other economic releases globally in recent months, but we all know why the reason is, and that's why it's very important that corporations are able to receive help and they're able to receive, support from a recovery, and hopefully that will come through the end of the pandemic over the coming months. And really, whether it's Petronas or a hospitality company or your restaurant or a hotel, every industry right now is suffering unless you are in the technology sector. And this is why, 2020 has very much been the year of tech. And this cliche that technology has taken over the world has never been more true today than what it has been before, because we're seeing, the Tesla share price is up 1,000% over the past 1 year below, and that's not a mistake. It really is up that much. We're seeing Apple's grown into a 2 trillion company, Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, the parent of Google, Microsoft, you name it. All of these tech giants are doing extremely well in this environment, but it's all of the other industries that rely on a different type of service, and they have a different type of product. And these are the guys that are suffering from this pandemic, and this is where the masses really, it's the mass that are suffering, and we do see weak expectations for the Petronas results later today, but that is for understandable and reasons that we all are aware of.
And Jameel, based on the announcements made by the other global oil and gas companies, share your insights as to how COVID-19 has disrupted the global oil and gas sector.
COVID-19 overall has disrupted the oil and gas sector in various ways, and with very limited positive information as to what it optimistically has been able to achieve. It has been a crisis for all companies, not only in the oil and gas sector. If you look at any kind of industry, I think the only industry really that has been able to withstand the challenges has been the technology sector. But even the technology sector has had some issues in terms of people needing to work from home. They're still having to adapt to change. It just happens to be that they're more prepared for change. So moving back towards the oil and gas sector specifically, what we could expect to see, and this is something that other global oil and gas major players have also hinted at, is that for these public listed companies, we could see a delay or postponement in giving dividends to shareholders, because the companies, the corporations, they need to keep the cash as their own capital.
And how long do you think will it take for the oil and gas sector to recover, and what is the most important step moving forward to help this sector recover?
When it comes to identifying a duration for how long it could take for this sector to recover, or any particular sector to recover, if we're talking about full capacity and back to the normal that we knew back at the beginning of 2020 and all the way up to the end of Q1, which was before the World Health Organization really announced this as a global pandemic, essentially what we need is for everybody to be able to forget about this whole situation. And again, I will keep saying the buzzword here is vaccine, a solution. At the moment, we still do not have a solution to the pandemic. And what we're trying to do is reduce the spread of infections and the spread of the disease. So this is what we really would need, is we need a solution. If there's a solution, then we can get back to a recovery perhaps even better than what we had before this pandemic.
And do you foresee more retrenchments in the sector? And how big and how will it impact, or how will it impact the other sectors globally?
So when we speak about retrenchments, there's a few different variations that this word could bring. For example, if we're talking about maybe, the action of making an employee redundant or some job losses in the sector, then yes, this sector, like every other global sector right now during a pandemic, there is a risk of jobs because companies are suffering, and when companies are suffering, budgets have to be looked into accordingly. Talking about other retrenchments, yes, there probably will be a reduction in costs as well, not just on a budget constraint, but also when it comes to technology costs and other costs of operating your business, because without revenue coming in and when money is scarce, unless there's a large supply of central bank and government support and other stimulus factors coming in to help, there is, of course, the risk of negative implications on the industry, because all of the industries right now are suffering from a pandemic where there is a lot of supply and capacity, but demand is extremely fragile because nobody knows what's happening next. Nobody can plan. So everything's very last minute and ever changing.
And do you expect slower investments from oil and gas companies? How will global oil and gas companies move forward?
This is a great question. I do expect there to be slower investments among oil and gas companies globally. One trend we might see, if you have a company out there with specific good balance sheets or very good fiscal strength, which I don't think there's many companies right now that are out there with such feasibility, because everybody's been hit by this pandemic in the same way. But nonetheless, if you do have a stronger balance sheet, you might be looking at an opportunity to purchase or acquire a company that needs some financial support. Generally, I think that the oil and gas industry, we're not looking at no more shale oil, because if anything, what we will see, if the oil price ticks higher and we go above $50, we're probably going to see US production come back into light, which means there'll be more shales production into the industry. But what we can hope for today is that perhaps the economic challenges and a lower oil price will weaken the chances of more shale oil, because at the end of the day, if there is more shale oil and there is more oversupply in the market, this means there's going to be a weaker and more depressed price overall.
And do you foresee light at the end of the tunnel soon, Jameel, for the oil and gas industry? Are you quite optimistic about the future of this sector?
So the biggest risk for the oil and gas sector, and specifically that industry, is that this is an industry that has been under different levels of challenges for a number of years, but this unprecedented pandemic, like multiple other industries in the world economy, is presented a massive shock. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but a lot of those challenges will still remain. Now, for example, what can help the industry is what all of us are very much hoping for, and that is for a reputable vaccination to be available to mass market, because this will take the hesitance and the fear factor which is really impacting consumers, is impacting corporations right now, because people are not sure as to whether there's going to be a second wave. They're not sure as to whether lockdowns could come once again. And it's very much a day-by-day market. So that's why I say the best thing that could happen if you're looking for light at the end of the tunnel for the oil and gas industry, it's the same as any other industry right now, whether that's the Malaysian economy or the wider global economy, hospitality, tourism, you name the industry. What we all need to see is a vaccine, because it will take fear away. It will present a lot more consumer confidence significantly, in fact, to a dramatic extent, and it will allow all of us, whether we are an individual citizen on the streets, whether we are a company, whether we are an executive or a day-to-day employee, to be able to plan ahead with clear guidance. We all want to get back to normality rather than the world that could change very suddenly.
Thank you very much, Jameel Ahmad. Itu tadi Jameel Ahmad, Pengarah Strategi Pelaburan Naga Group AG. Naga adalah syarikat pelaburan dan juga fintech tersenarai di Jerman. Dan teruskan bersama kami untuk laporan berkenaan dengan perkembangan kewangan ataupun keputusan kewangan separuh pertama Petronas pada petang ini. Kita akan berehat seketika, kembali selepas ini.